The southern corner of Sicily is an arid landscape, characterised by deep gorges scoured into the Iblean plateau. But it's home to some of the island's most beautiful and evocative towns. Cresting the hilltops or skirting the canyons, the houses stack like sugar cubes. The local limestone, baked by the hot Sicilian sun, gives the buildings a warm, honeyed colour. And it's here that we find some of the island's most magnificent churches, the grandest palazzi, the noblest facades. Corbels of balconies are decorated with carvings of the town's erstwhile residents in a humorous masquerade. And the skylines are punctured by domes and campaniles of glorious cathedrals. They are all the exponents of what we have come to term Baroque architecture, and are some of the very finest examples in the whole of southern Italy. The churches were built on higher ground with a flight of steps leading up to them. Notice the purely decorative columns, the scrolls on the capitals just for ornament, the convex facade. But what do we mean by the term Baroque? Essentially, it was the artistic expression of the reaction to the Reformation in Northern Europe. It was a movement of flourishes and embellishment and great expression in all the art forms. Down there behind me is the centre of the town of Scicli. You'll notice the town hall with the flags flying outside it. So why do we find such a great concentration of Baroque architecture here in the southeast of Sicily? Well, it all boils down to an event in January 1693, or rather two events. They were two cataclysmic earthquakes, the first one occurring in the night of the 11th of January and the second one just 3 nights later. The epicentre of these earthquakes was somewhere just off the east coast of Sicily, and it was the largest seismic event in the whole of Sicily's history. Over 60,000 people lost their lives. That's more than 5% of the island's population, and tens of thousands of others were made homeless. It destroyed more than 50 towns and cities, and it was very much a wake-up call. By the very nature of where we are here, we are at the furthest part of the island from Palermo, which of course was the capital. And in those days, the barons down here, at that time it was still ruled over by the Spanish, but the barons very much had their own run of things. And hence it was a wake-up call to the Spanish authorities, in particular to the Habsburg king Charles II, who was away in Madrid, that finally something had to be done about this area. And so it was, therefore, that Charles II commissioned architects and builders to reconstruct the towns in this part of the island. And that's why almost all the architecture and almost all the building that we see in this part of the island dates from post 1693, or in other words, mainly the beginning of the 18th century. And that's why it has a very homogeneous feel about it. So the other question that inevitably gets asked is, why are there so many churches? Well, the simple answer is because that it was the church that was rich. Sicilian families, and especially aristocratic families throughout the 16th and 17th and 18th century, they tended to be large families with numerous offspring, and inevitably, at least certainly the elder of those offspring, would be expected to enter either the military or the church. So for the daughters that would mean becoming a nun, and for the sons it would mean becoming a priest. And when their offspring entered the church, the head of the family would offer the church a dowry, a sum of money, could also be some land, for example, and this would ensure his place in heaven. But it also meant that the church grew rich on all these proceeds. So by the beginning of the 18th century, the church was really the organisation that had the money to do much of this rebuilding. But the other result of this is that the inhabitants' quarters tended to be very cramped and small. They wouldn't have had running water, and certainly, of course, no electricity. So, of course, come the 20th century, people really found that, especially with numerous families, these places were too small to live in, and they began to move out and live in the outskirts of these towns. And the centre of these towns very often became quite abandoned. Certainly if you walk through them today, you'll see a lot of for sale signs, vendici signs. People just died off really, and nobody continued to live in these houses. We've come finally to Modica, once upon a time known as the Venice of the South. The rivers that once flowed through it have long since been diverted, but nevertheless the beauty and charm remains. On the very top of the hill there is Pizzo Belvedere, but look at all the houses tumbling down the hillside. Panning round a little bit, just there in centre screen right in front of us is the church of San Giorgio, designed by Rosario Gagliardi, and it's unique in Sicily because it's the only church that has 4 aisles. You can see the 2 aisles either side of the central nave, and notice the steps leading up to it. We're going to walk up those a bit later on, and it's quite an exercise. So for all those steps we need some energy, and we've just dropped into the famous Bonaiuto chocolate shop to stock up with some rations. With all these steps, this is why Sicilians live to 100. This here then, the Church of San Giorgio, designed and built by Rosario Gagliardi. And notice also the bells set into the facade. This was different from the rest of Italy, where the bells were invariably set inside a campanile adjacent to the church. This is what's known as a meridian line. There are a few in churches around Sicily, most notably in the cathedral in Palermo. But if you follow the line up towards the ceiling, you will see that it comes to a tiny little hole just there to the right of the window. A sunbeam of light shines through, and at midday, with the sun due south, it will create a small disc of light on the floor at a point somewhere along this line, which will tell you the day of the year. Here we are, Notice we're in Aquarius, the month of February. Whereas in December and January, with the sun lower in the sky, the light will fall further towards this end. Here, you see, we have Capricorn,